I saw this post on IGN talking about a horror game named Horses being banned from Steam, and the studio has a high risk of closure. And I did some research on it, and it turns out there's a high likelihood that Mastercard and Visa are behind this one again. And it harkens back to the whole, is Collective Shout a part of any of this still? I said on X, here we go again. Valve is seemingly bending the knee to Visa and MasterCard, and indie devs are the ones paying the price. Horses is a fully legal adult game that has passed ESRB and PEGI, got accepted on Epic, GOG, Itch, and Humble, and even consoles had no issues with it. Yet here we have Steam banning it with no explanation, no guidance, and no chance for the devs to fix whatever they supposedly didn't like. What the fuck? This isn't about safety, legality, or protecting anyone. This is Valve panicking over what Visa and MasterCard might flag as risky, so they preemptively censor games just to avoid upsetting the payment processors. And because of that, a small studio might have to shut down completely after 2 years of trying to get answers from Valve. Credit card companies should not be deciding what art is allowed on the biggest PC storefront. Steam is hiding behind vague rules, refusing to talk to developers, and letting Visa and MasterCard quietly shape what games can even exist. It's pathetic, it's cowardly, and it's hurting real creators. And I tag Grums, Savvy, and Chibi Reviews. And I gave the source of IGN with the article that we're going to go through. But before I do that, there was an update, by the way. Valve did respond as indie horror studio accuses Steam of censorship for banning its game about nude human horses. Valve told Santa Ragione its game featured child exploitation. The studio says otherwise. And it is a horror game, and horror games are going to deal with some pretty sketch topics, okay? This is PC Gamer saying they reached for comment, and Valve replied that its content review team extensively discussed in 2023 whether to reconsider its refusal to list horses for sale on Steam, but ultimately held its decision. Valve's full statement reads, "We reviewed the game back in 2023. At that time, the developer indicated with their release date in Steamworks that they plan to release a few months later. Based on content in the store page, we told the developer we would need to review the build itself. This happens sometimes if content on the store page causes concern that the game itself might not fall within our guidelines. After our team played through the build and reviewed the content, we gave the developer feedback about why we couldn't ship the game on Steam, consistent with our onboarding rules and guidelines. A short while later, the developer asked us to reconsider the review, and our internal content review team discussed that extensively and communicated to the developer our final decision that we were not going to ship the game on Steam." While Valve's statement doesn't provide much additional detail about the decision making, it explains why Santa Ragione was asked to provide a playable build for horses before its store listing could be approved, which isn't typically required of developers until closer to their application's launch. And this is the original story that I saw on IGN. Unsettling horror game Horses banned from Steam, leaving studio with high risk of closure. Quote, "We reject subjective obscenity standards and believe this kind of moralizing censorship evokes a darker past." Indie horror game Horses is preparing launch on December 2nd on the Epic's Game Store, GOG, itch.io, and the Humble Store. But one place it won't be is on Steam. That, by the way, should be ringing alarm bells. Why is it okay on Epic Game Store and everywhere else, but Steam is drawing a line on it? Steam used to be the beacon of never doing any issues with any of this. Because Steam has banned the game for, according to the developer, reasons that remain unclear even after 2 years of back and forth with Valve. And according to the developer, this ban seems likely to result in the shutdown of their entire studios. We spoke with Pietro Vigri Riva of Italian studio Santa Ragione, Wheels of Aurora, Miramoon, who explained their side of the story. According to Riva, and the detailed FAQ shared with IGN, Santa Region first submitted Horses on Steam in 2023 when the game was in a very unfinished state. We were only about halfway through development and had scrambled together a build that could be played start to finish solely to satisfy Steam's request for a playable version of the game to open a coming soon page, something we had never been asked for before, Riva explains. It was at this stage that Valve rejected the game. So this is, let's check it here. There it is. Seems fine to me. It's a bunch of horses. Oh. Oh. Okay. That is definitely a trailer. Riva goes on to say that Valve did not offer any explanation as to why the game was rejected, nor was there any opportunity for the game to change whatever the offending content was. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't get anyone at Valve to work with them to reverse the decision. Steam's decision came without a detailed feedback, and the ban notice did not cite any specific scenes or elements. For months, we repeatedly asked for what triggered the ban and received no answer. Man, it feels like making videos on YouTube. We also offered unsuccessfully to change any content deemed unfit, especially since the game was still in early development at the time of submission. So what triggered the ban? Riva still doesn't know. While minds may jump to Steam's recent banning of a number of adult games to comply with the sudden crackdowns from payment processors, Riva says this ban took place long before that was even a conversation. And all the content in the game is fully legal. Yes, this took place long before that was a conversation, but still an issue right now. And you're trying to get them to relook at it right now. He does have a theory, though. The automated review sent by Steam in 2023 included a link to Steam's onboarding documentation, as well as the following sentence. Regardless of a developer's intentions with their product, we will not distribute content that appears, in our judgment, to depict sexual conduct involving a minor. Horses, Riva says, does not contain any such content. All characters in the game are older than 20, as communicated by their appearance and through dialogue and documents you encounter in the game. He also asserts that the game is not pornographic. It is, per the studio, about the burden of familial trauma and Puritan values, the dynamics of totalitarian power, and the ethics of personal responsibility. I will say, when it comes to horror games, it's a very fine line, because this is the territory where it gives creators the opportunity to explore very not necessarily socially acceptable tropes in games. And there's typically a lot of backlash from the Karens in the community. But as long as it's not like glorifying that stuff and making it like, oh, this is a good thing, I do wonder. I think there might be a conversation to be like, well, it's a horror game. How that's literally what the ratings bureau is for. And my line that I draw with it is, what is allowed in movies? You see crazy stuff in movies all the time, especially, what was it, 8mm? Like, remember that Nicolas Cage movie? There's crazy shit that happens in movies all the time. And it's not necessarily of age people either. But yet, for some reason, when it comes to video games, it's like, well, you can't do that because games are for kids. It's like, no, that's the whole point of the ESRB, is games aren't for kids sometimes. Sometimes they're for adults only. From the fact sent to IGN, while it does contain some sexual elements, the intent is never to arouse. It uses challenging, unconventional material to encourage discussion. It invites players to examine why something feels the way it does, what it says about the characters and the systems at work, and where their limits lie. It is about tension, not erotic content. We apologize if we got your hopes up for horse porn. Hassan's uncle's crying somewhere. What Riva thinks triggered the ban is a scene that existed in the game during the initial Steam submission, where a man and his young daughter visit a farm. As the fact explains, Daughter wants to ride one of the horses. In the game, the horses are humans wearing horse masks and gets to pick which one. What followed was an interactive dialogue sequence where the player is leading by a lead as if they were a horse, a naked adult woman with a young girl on her shoulders. The scene is not sexual in any way, but it is possible that the juxtaposition is what triggered the flag. We have since changed the character in the scene to a 20-something woman, both to avoid the juxtaposition and, more importantly, because the dialogue delivered in that scene, which deals with the societal structure in the world of horses, works much better when delivered by an older character. Riva says he tried everything. He's tried speaking to contacts at Valve who previously worked at the studio in the past games. According to him, they claimed not to know the specific reasons for the ban and said it would not be possible to find out and tell them. He reached out to Valve again and again, but has yet to receive any official explanation what content was offensive, nor an opportunity to resubmit without that content. IGN also reached out to Valve for comment for this piece, but did not hear back in time for publication. Riva also says he's had no issues with any other platform. Epic asked his studio to update just the screenshots on the game store page so that not to include nudity, which Riva says they complied with, and the game was accepted. As for consoles, he says he's shown the game to console partners, and he hasn't heard any concerns about the content. Horses also has received PEGI and ESRB ratings that would be required for console distribution. The only reason we haven't actively started porting the game is lack of funds. So that is curious. I could keep reading through this whole thing, but my greater point with this is I think it's strange that the game had concerning parts in it in a very early build. And concerning meaning not socially acceptable stuff, we'll say. And they've since updated that, told Steam about it, and Steam is doing absolutely nothing about it. And then PC Gamer comes back with we have a response when we reached out to Valve, and they said, we checked it back then, and we said no, and that's no is no on a very early build of the game. And that's kind of fucked for the developer. I don't think that's really fair at all. The developer seems to be like, we're open to doing whatever you need us to do to get the game on your store. What do we need to do to get it there? And Steam is responding to PC Gamer, but they're not saying anything to IGN. They're not saying anything to the developer, more importantly. And the developer is over here like on the verge of collapse because this is the problem that you run into when you work on a horror game. I've said this before in the past. Censorship is necessary in certain areas of society. I understand that. I'm not going to be retarded and be like, no censorship anywhere. There is a gray area, and the gray area gets magnified when it comes to horror games. Understood. Totally get that. But if this continues to happen, all it's going to do is create an environment where horror games are afraid to push boundaries, where they're afraid to explore human emotions that make you uncomfortable. And you could argue that's kind of the point of horror in the first place. I mean, outside of scaring you. And if you, as a young developer, are looking to break into the industry and you want to make a banger game and you have a great idea for it and you want to put all the time and work and effort and money into it, and then you see this kind of stuff happening in front of you, you pull the reins back and you're like, it's not worth it. I cannot risk my career, my livelihood, my money, my job, my work, my time, everything on something that may not be accepted in a studio. So all this does is tone down and curve the edges and make everything just rainbows and butterflies for gaming. And in a weird way, it makes me feel like the people that want to push a LGBTQ plus agenda are totally fine with that. in a weird way, which ironically, some of those are the ones with the biggest kinks out there. But we'll see what happens with this. I just want to draw attention to it because I think this is something that is fascinating. And I wouldn't be so taken back by it if it wasn't coming out on Epic, GOG, Itch, and Humble. But it's coming out everywhere else. So it's weird that Steam is still just putting their foot down and being like, yeah, no, we're still not doing it. Even though it sounds like the developer is willing to dance and say, what do you need us to do? And seems like, no, you didn't hear us. We said no. It's very strange. Again, I know they said this happened a couple years ago, but we're now in the modern era of 2025 going into 2026 right now. And with the Visa MasterCard situation, it just seems a little bit convenient that they're just not budging on it. It makes you wonder. It makes you wonder. We'll see what happens. I'll keep you guys posted, but for now, I will leave that one right there.